Hi, I'm Ricardo P Lloyd. I'm a British actor, and I'm joined by Jennie Ensor, who is an author. And we're going to talk about the audiobook that I did, which is called Silence, based on her novel Silence. So we did an audiobook version, and we're going to discuss the themes and the story and just some of the inspiration behind the book today. So Jennie, if you would like to just introduce yourself to the viewers and just give a brief background on your career and biography.
Okay. Well, I've been writing for quite a while. I started off, I came from a dysfunctional family, and it took me a while to get into what I'm doing now. I was first working as a journalist. I've travelled to Australia. I lived in Sydney for about 15 years, and when I came back here, I really basically decided to write novels, and so this is Silence is my fourth novel. I wrote one which is a little bit more autobiographical, The Girl in His Eyes. Then there were a couple more, and this came out, I was doing the research during lockdown. I got the ideas during the lockdown period.
That's pretty interesting. Similar to me, I feel like coming from the backgrounds of and certain places, it kind of was my motivation of why I wanted to be an actor. I felt like it gave me a voice, and I want to tell authentic stories that touches the hearts and minds and reflects humanity, because I feel like a lot of stories are very unheard of or untold, and I feel like as an artist, as an actor, I have the ability to do that. So, moving on to our next question, could you provide viewers with a brief overview of the main themes explored in your novel Silence?
Okay, well, it's hard to be brief because there's quite a few of them. I'd say there's love, fear and betrayal is one of the three things. The three main things is the love between two teenagers, their relationship. There is the fear and courage involved in speaking out about something and doing the right thing when you feel that you should do something, but there's a lot of reasons why it's difficult and you're afraid to do it. So that comes up quite a bit. There's also the relationship between father and son, the teenage exploitation in various ways. Quite a lot, because it's a crime novel. There's quite a bit about right and wrong, not just ethical issues, but also the punishment of the justice, I guess, and how people are punished, what happens to them after they've committed a crime, the impact of crime.
That's pretty deep stuff there. So how long did it kind of take you to write the book, would you say?
Well, it took about 6 months, first of all, to do the first draft, and then a lot of editing. I spent a lot more. I generally, I'm quite intuitive as a writer, so I don't do a lot of pre-planning, but with this one I had a lot of the ideas up front, and then I realised it's going to be quite complex with the 3 points of view and the police investigation, as well as the arcs of the two teenagers. So it did say probably another year to do all the edits on it.
That's pretty interesting. So as the voice behind the audiobook version of Silence, I was intrigued by the depths of the characters. How did you approach the psychological aspect of the characters while writing the book?
Well, again, I'm very intuitive. So I'd say Luke came to me as he was almost like a voice in my head. Which is really weird considering the different backgrounds. I'm like white, late to middle-aged woman, and Luke is a mixed race teenager. So that was, but I did almost hear his voice, and it's about really trying to think deeply about putting yourself in their position and in their shoes, and think how they would respond and be empathetic, and to an extent I think we, as a writer, even though I haven't lived all these lives, I don't know what it's like. It's just trying to imagine how it would be.
I relate to that, because as an actor I have to try to imagine those characters. A lot of the times I don't know those characters, but I have to find who those characters are and be able to portray that the best way I possibly can. So moving on to our next question. In Silence, the impact of crime plays a significant role. Could you discuss how you portray the effects of crime on individuals and societies within the story?
Okay, well, I suppose the easiest thing is to say about a couple of examples of that. There's at the start of a novel, there's a teenage girl who is found stabbed through the heart, and I actually describe that as it happens, and which is for some people a little hard to take. So, and that triggers a whole chain of events. So there's the detective, the murder squad locally, and what they do to try to apprehend the killer, and that is related to the gang that the teenagers get embroiled in. And later on, there's a whole issue about the murdered girl's mother, what she does or doesn't do. She's really torn between her own safety, keeping her family safe, the rest of her family safe, and doing the right thing, talking to the police about it. So there's a wall of silence, I know it's a typical thing, wall of silence they say, which happens in the novel. And later on there's another incident where it's all outside, part of it's set around a council estate, and there's a elderly lady living in the estate who has witnessed this horrible stabbing, and she later on must decide what to do and whether to do what she thinks is right or keep quiet about it.
It's pretty intriguing stuff. So how was it in terms of the research for a lot of these themes?
Yes, well, that was one of the most challenging things to actually find out about. Because there is a fair bit about gang life and the two teenagers Luke and Jessamine, who get embroiled in a gang, and I didn't know very much about it, and I started to find people who could help me and who talked about it. Various people I met. There's a charity called I think it's the Exit Foundation, and this guy Paul Days runs it, and he helped me a lot he introduced me to various young men and teenagers who had been in the gang life and wanted to come out. And also on the police side, I had a lot of help from someone who was he was like running basically Sussex Police, and he now writes novels. And then also there was a Met detective who helped me on the phone, and that was really interesting about what the police do, and that lots of really delicate sort of areas, and if they suspect someone's involved in a gang, how far they can go, and the whole monitoring and when they intervene. So there's a huge amount of research, and also all the urban slang was another big. And that's what I was going to touch on, because me doing the audiobook version, I actually found it very challenging, because I had to try and find those nuances in those characters, because I didn't want to sound robotic, because I felt like doing it. Obviously, the themes and all that stuff, the essence of the story, what you're conveying in the book, I got it, and that's what drew me to wanted to do the project. But some of the wording, I felt like maybe some of these characters wouldn't say it like that, so I was trying to find all those nuances so it could be authentic. I was always aware that I just felt like someone was saying, apart from there was various issues with publication, when you have a lot of urban slang in it, and also the ethnicities of all the characters, that was another issue. I was a bit of a challenge for me. I was thinking, how do I convey what it's like in a gang in this part of London? But for me, I didn't want. So I thought maybe I don't want the absolutely correct terms necessarily if they're going to be changing, because maybe by the time the book comes out and then the audiobook, is a lot down track, and a lot of words which are current might have changed.
Okay. So you wanted to get some kind of essence of it, but not the whole entire thing.
Yeah, I mean, because I had one of the big issues was getting it published in the first place. I had my previous publisher didn't like it, and she said something about she wasn't so keen on the teenagers and on the language. So after that, I changed a lot of it. I had terms like mandem, and I'd say mans do this and stuff. I'd been watching Top Boy and this and that, looking at urban slang dictionaries, and so I thought, oh well, I better get rid of some of this particular urban slang too, so that it doesn't alienate potentially older readers or readers who just can't get it.
Yeah. So that's an interesting point. So who would you say that the target audience of this book is aimed towards?
Well, that is the thing, that I'm not a natural marketing person, and when I wrote it, it did have to have 2 teenagers in, and that is, and I really they carry a lot of most of the story really, and so so there are people who love crime and police procedurals, and I think I'd say it's very atmospheric and sort of in-depth crime as a crime novel and a thriller. And then there are people, I hope, teenagers themselves, although I know there's a thing that teenagers don't read books, but I hope teenagers and young people, and especially if they've confronted any of these issues, they might find it interesting.
So yeah, another thing that I wanted to ask you actually is, one of the intriguing elements of Silence is the exploration of morality and justice. How do you tackle these particular themes, and what message did you intend to convey to the readers?
Okay, I don't like to try to send a message in any way, because that seems like a very blunt way to do it, but it's more about sort of raising an issue and raising the question, what would you do if you were, as the reader, what would you do if you were in this situation, and somehow highlighting all the quite complex sort of issues and nuances. And like, there's the detective who has a secret he's been keeping to himself for 25 years, and he feels he ought to talk to his son about it, and it's to do with his own father and what happened to him. And as a result, the detective has got PTSD, and it starts to affect him more and more as the novel goes on. So that is like a very key area where he has to decide. Well, he knows in effect that he should be brought to justice himself for what he's done, but he's one of the police who's meant to be enforcing justice in a way. So it's like the blurred boundaries of trying to bring up the
it's a bit of a paradox,
the nuances, and but some ambiguities really. And then there's Luke, without saying what happens to him, but he goes through some really, really difficult things, and it's sort of arguable, whether or not he has been brought to justice in the fullest sense of the word, because there is a justice which is like, okay, you've done something wrong, and this is the sentence, and this is what you should do, but this is what you're going to go to prison for 10 years, but there is a real sense of justice, and has that been served?
Thanks for sharing that. So from my experience narrating the audiobook, I found the suspense and the twist in Silence to be captivating. Can you share any unique aspects of the story that kept readers on the edge of their seat?
Well, okay, there's the aspects that writing suspense or writing a thriller, and that's something that I guess it's not so unique, but it's very much, I think, having the 3 threads, the 3 main characters, the 2 teenagers who get involved in the gang, and the detective, they have a different, coming from different places. So I can end the chapter on something which is like a cliffhanger for Luke, say, and he's about to be, something awful is going to happen to him, and then I go into what's going to happen with the detective, and the detective is doing something, trying to get hold of, on the trail of a gang leader or something like that. But the specific thing with Silence is really fleshing out the teenagers, and that was a big risk for me to do, really, which I realised afterwards.
So another thing that I was going to say is, as an actor, I often delve into the motivations and emotions of the characters I portray. How did you develop the psychological depths of the characters in Silence, and did you draw inspiration from real life events or people? So I think you pretty much answered that earlier on.
I did partly. With Luke, I don't know. I don't think there was one specific. I felt I knew him already when I started writing, but I can't think of any. It must have been just films or. But there was the gang leader, and I did draw inspiration from real life, because my home is in North London, and I did a lot of reading about various gang leaders, and also not. There was a sort of gang leader which the gang that sells drugs and so on, and gets teenagers to go and sell it on the streets. And then there were the other types of gang, which is more organised crime, and there was around Haringey and Green Lanes, there was for years this really extensive, which probably is still going on, extensive network of almost like mafia in a way, so, and controlling the area. So, and they were just reading about a particular gang leader on Broadwater Farm Estate years back, and some of what he was involved in, and also some of maybe the legends around him and the stuff about voodoo practices, and that really caught my imagination, that voodoo thing.
Wow.
And so I put a bit of that in, and then there was this the more organised crime type gang that I read about, this torture chamber which was discovered in some place off Green Lanes, and that also sort of comes into it a bit.
So essentially, like, as an author, you kind of are like a sponge, innit? You're absorbing every element and trying to put that into a narrative.
Very much, and you can't always tell. I mean, I think also I see the gang life as, in a way, it's like a dysfunctional family, but much bigger. And my own family was really dysfunctional, and I just think that's probably why looking back, that's part of the inspiration.
That's probably where you get the empathy for certain characters from your own upbringing, right? So, in Silence, were there any particular societal or cultural issues you wanted to address? If so, what inspired you to incorporate them into the narrative?
Well, there's very much the exploitation issue, and there's a white girl who's comes from middle class, quite a affluent family, but her mother has become an alcoholic and is not really there for her. Her father has disappeared, so that has a big impact. And then there is, right? That's right, Jessamine in Muswell Hill, which is near me. And then there's Luke, he's very much affected after the death of his mother, and he's now his father had left at a young age. He's been brought up by a stepfather. Say young men especially, and how so many, especially black and mixed race and different ethnic groups who are not necessarily, still not a really sort of part, in many ways, not part of the wider society, and don't have the opportunities necessarily. Right. So that is something I wanted to address.
Because sometimes they're kind of excluded or marginalized. So I think that's powerful that you wanted to kind of explore that particular subject matter. So it goes on to say, I've got another question. So when you do any project, there's always some kind of challenge or obstacle or thing that's in your path to kind of stop you from getting that project off the ground. So when you wrote Silence, was there any of that kind of, or any of those issues, like obstacles or challenges you faced when you was writing the book?
Well, I am a very stubborn person, so I naturally just, once I had the idea and it was strong enough that I could sort of power through. A lot of the writing was through lockdown, so that wasn't the easiest thing, but I would say, in a sense, but most challenging thing was getting a publisher who was able to accept my own take on a crime novel, and a very original take, really, or very different to the normal type of crime novel and a thriller. I've already mentioned, so that the main challenge, I suppose, was getting the teenagers right and the culture in the gangs right. And at least to be believable and to be credible enough. And so I had to do a lot of hunting around, like friends of friends and contacts, and I found this someone who sold drugs of different kinds, who had done. So he helped me a lot, and just the other thing, I think I touched on it before, but with all this, there's a huge amount now of, I guess, the cancel culture and getting things. I was aware that publishers have been, if you're an author, you can easily get something wrong or be criticised because something isn't authentic. And I was just at the back of my mind while I was finishing, I had people say, "Oh, you don't want to have a lot of make the gang all black," basically. So that was one of the things. So I thought, and then it's what is true and what is authentic, and how much could I change that? So I changed a few. I made some of the gang members different ethnicities.
Right, like you have
and I was asking this Met detective, how realistic is that? And he seemed to think that was reasonable. But then I did a lot of reading more academic books about gangs, and I sort of thought, oh, perhaps they would, to be totally authentic, they would probably be one ethnic group or one sort of more similar, that they might be, I don't know, different. That was one thing I struggled with. So I changed it a little bit, and then I thought, oh well, I've got to just keep it with what it is.
Yeah, that's pretty much my question. So moving on to the next segment, I want you to ask me some questions on the process of me recording.
That would be great. As for narrator of silence, what drew you to the story and made you want to voice the crime novel?
So I think I was approached about this audiobook that was going to happen, Silence, and I read it, and what kind of struck me was Luke's character. Yes, I was kind of familiar with a character like Luke. I'm from Northwest London myself, so I've seen these characters. I've seen these particular things around me, but I found like a depth in him, and which was relatable. For example, like a single family home and all this kind of stuff. These are themes that I know very, very too well. So I thought I could actually portray this or do the best version of telling this story.
Okay. How did you approach the task of bringing the characters to life?
I think sometimes it's just instinctive. As an actor, you do your research and stuff like that. But this is the first time I've ever done an audiobook, so this was kind of like a new skill set in itself. And a lot of times when I'm in the studio, I was kind of like figuring it out as I was going along, and I was trying to find the nuances within the characters in the story to bring the truth. And it took a lot of hard work. It was very demanding out of me, but I think unless you're in a place where you're being pushed to grow, you're not really moving forward. So I was so happy to do the task at hand and do whatever it took to bring justice and to the story, because I actually believed in it.
Yeah, that's good to hear. What about specific challenges while you were voicing Silence, and how did you overcome them?
I would just say, like, when you're doing like an audiobook of this depth, it's quite a long book. You have to keep your energy up, especially as well when you're doing a character. And it's almost like what you were saying earlier, like these characters come to you. I feel like, not to sound weird, as an actor, I feel like some of these characters or the things that I do, it's almost like I'm meant to be doing it. I'm meant to be the vessel of carrying that through. So I felt like Luke, I'm not a mixed race guy. I'm a young black guy, but I can be identified as a mixed race guy. And so I felt like that character of feeling like he doesn't know where he belongs and all of this stuff, it came through, and I felt like I could be the one to carry that. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. And did you have any techniques or strategies to create a distinct and engaging listening experience for the audience?
Like I said earlier, it's just about getting your voice and your energy up, because when you're doing voice work, your body can be fighting against what so your mind is saying, I need to do this project, but your body's fighting against it. And I was spending like so much hours in the studio, probably about 5-6 hours doing the recording, and it was just like one thing after another. So I had to try and keep my energy up and try and do vocal exercises and stuff like that, so that my voice don't feel tired and it's not coming through in the recording.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I would love to watch it actually, the whole that process.
Surprisingly, I didn't actually record anything. I did do little bits on my phone, but I didn't. I wish I would have recorded that
you
process.
should have recorded a bit of video.
Yeah.
No, I find it really hard just to read, even if I've got it in front of me, but to read it without making mistakes and in a consistent tone, that must be really, really difficult.
And don't get me wrong, Adrian, who's the producer, he's also the guy that founded Audiobookes.
Yes.
So he would correct me. You know, if I said a word wrong, he would correct me. And sometimes it would be like a fight in the studio, but it wasn't a fight because we were just trying to get the job done. But you're getting annoyed and frustrated because you're not saying the word right, and then you're just like, how do I say this word? And it's like your body's fighting against that, but you're pushing through. So that's the challenge that I kind of had.
And what about your favourite? Did you have any favourite characters or scenes, and what made them memorable for you?
So one of the favourite scenes, or a dark scene that was kind of interesting, was Luke and Jess. I'm not going to give it too much away, but he finds the mum dead, well, with Jess, and that was quite a dark theme that was covered in the book. You know, the drug and alcohol abuse and all that stuff. So that was interesting. I've never seen anything like that, like on that capacity, but I had to get myself in the mind frame of that, so that when I'm saying it and I'm reading it, it's truthful to the listener.
Yeah.
So I think things like that, I think you done a fantastic job in terms of, you know, exploring some of these darker themes.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'll just butt in with my experience, because I had a friend who was alcoholic. She died very recently, and I knew that I knew basically the last few years that there was a risk of something awful happening, but seeing her when she was at her lowest, that actually gave me some of the ideas how to tackle that character, the alcoholic mother, which is awful, but I just felt, I had to make her like that.
And another thing that I wanted to touch on as well is Luke's relationship with the stepfather.
Okay. Because
it's like he's trying to get kind of validation, like in terms of manhood, because he's never had his real father, so he's trying to seek that love and that thing from, you know, the stepfather, but sometimes the lines are blurred because that's not his child. So I think that's some of the themes that really touched me. And also as well, like when you look at your own personal experiences of growing up and stuff, you can see the parallels, and I can see how Luke would feel in certain scenarios in the story, and I was able to tap into that, you know, from my own personal experience and things that I know to be true.
Well, I'm relieved that you say that, and I have had with the response to Silence has been amazing in terms of what people have read, who have read it. It seems to touch a chord with people. So can you share any interesting or fun behind the scenes anecdotes or experiences that you had while recording the book?
Not necessarily, but I feel like for what made it successful and made us be able to deliver it is that you have to have good relationships. So I actually built like a good relationship with Adrian. So it's like I had to have that level of trust, because it's being vulnerable. When you're in a studio or you're recording or you're doing any kind of acting, you have to be vulnerable. And you know, people might say this is voice work, but it is kind of acting in some aspects, because this is not me. I'm not Luke. So when I'm saying this, I want the reader to feel connected to this character. So that was a work in itself. The anecdotes or any like behind the stories, it just we will laugh. Like I'll say the line wrong, or I'll do it wrong, or I'll say a word wrong, and I'll be frustrated. But you know, that's like part of the process. So it's like I had to kind of enjoy that process of doing it, and I had to find the fun in it instead of making it just work, because it is work, but you have to find the fun and the balance.
Yes, and you had to go to their Hobeck Towers I think it's in Staffordshire, isn't it? In the country.
So outside of London. It's like a little village outside of, I think, Birmingham or something like that, past Birmingham.
Okay.
Yeah, so
and it's a different environment.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because they have like it's like almost like a middle of nowhere kind of place. So that was an interesting experience, coming from Northwest London, getting to see different
that sounds
places.
idyllic.
Yeah.
To me. Yeah. So as an actor, what do you find the most rewarding about narrating audiobooks, and how does it differ from other acting roles you've done?
The only difference that I would say doing an audiobook is the fact that in normal acting, we'll do our research, we'll have our notes, and just like yourself, you know, sometimes it's primary or secondary, or it's just your imagination that you're using. With an audiobook, it's almost like I was figuring it out on the day. So I'll be in the studio and I'm figuring it out. I didn't really do any prep work like that. It was just almost reading it, trying to make sense of it, finding that, and just figuring it out. So that's what you're doing. It's like trial and errors a lot of times in the studio. You're figuring it out, you're finding your voice. So yeah, that process was pretty an interesting process. But I felt like because of my skill set as an actor, it was quite kind of easy to kind of do anyway. And
also you have all the lines there without having to remember them.
Exactly.
That must make it easier in some ways. Yeah.
But also as well, I would like highlight certain parts as well and make sure that I understood the phrases or the words, and just go over that so that I'm actually sticking to what is written and it's not just made up. That it's literally just being delivered from what's on the page.
Okay. And what do you hope listeners will take away from your narration of Silence? And is there a particular atmosphere or mood you wanted to create?
I just wanted people to feel that kind of empathy for characters like Luke and Jez. So I hope that, the whole experience of reading or listening to that book, they can relate to these characters and see the world through a different lens, because sometimes it's not all just black and white. There's a lot of shades of greys in society. And I want people to be able to, even if you don't recognize like Luke's story or the other stories in the book, you want to learn, and you want to explore, and you want to go outside of yourself. And I think that's very important for people from middle class, upper class, lower class, all different levels, to be able to see other people's stories.
Yeah. There isn't very much, because I know in the media so much about just the bare bones of some teenagers stabbed or some gang-related thing. But there's nothing about, because I wondered what it would be like for a teenage boy to be, there's all the attractions of a gang, to be exposed to all that, and what happens when he joins a gang. But I didn't know anyone, and there's very little, there seems to be very little out there which goes into a lot of depth about it.
Whereas, like myself, I actually know people from gangs. Like, for example, I went to Calcutta City Academy, and there was one guy in my year, Sanchez Girl. He was the youngest murderer in the country. And it was tragic, like hearing stories like this, or seeing it firsthand. Or there was another kid that got stabbed outside of my school. So I saw this stuff around me all the time.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is that I never went down that path. Obviously, I'm a successful actor today and I'm doing things today, but I could have easily went down that path and been involved in that stuff, because when it's around you, it's so easy to be drawn into all of this stuff. So, when I'm reading stuff like this, I hope to God that the audience can feel the authenticness that's coming from me, and it's not just a cliche, Ricardo's doing gang story. I try to stay away from the stereotypes, because I just want to shed light on the truth of human beings. I don't want you to just see a stereotypical, like, gang, like the Top Boy that you spoke on earlier, but I want you to see the human element that they cut, they bleed, they go through pain, they go through different emotions that everyone goes through. Yeah, I think that was it. I'm Ricardo P Lloyd, and I was joined by Jennie Ensor, the author of Silence, and we literally just did a session today where we were speaking about the crime novel Silence, and yeah, it's been pretty interesting. So thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you.